My neighbor came running toward me, his face pale, chest heaving as if he had been sprinting for miles. His voice cracked when he yelled, "Stay away from the shed!" I froze for a moment, watching him tremble, but then I gave him a quick smile and stepped closer anyway. The old wooden boards creaked under my shoes, and through the narrow crack in the door, I saw something shift inside. My stomach dropped. Something was moving. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs, because whatever was inside that shed was not supposed to be there. If you're hooked already, make sure to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Michael Hale. I'm a retired high school teacher, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my daughter, Clara. She's 17, bright, and stubborn, and ever since her mother passed away last year, she has been restless. Curiosity pulls her into places she doesn't belong, and I've been doing my best to keep her safe while holding our home together. Our neighbor, Mr. Rowan, is in his 70s. He's lived on this street longer than anyone, but he keeps to himself. His house is always silent, his yard overgrown, and his shed in the back is the one thing kids on our block talk about. They whisper stories, daring each other to sneak up to it. Most laugh it off, but even as an adult, I never liked being near it. Clara, of course, was fascinated by it. She would look at me with that mischievous spark in her eyes and say, "Dad, it's just an old shed. What's the big deal?" And I would always tell her the same thing. Sometimes what you don't know can't hurt you. Sometimes it's the opposite. I thought I was just giving her fatherly advice. But that afternoon, when Mr. Rowan came running, gasping for air, begging me to stay away, I realized the shed wasn't just an old neighborhood mystery. Something was wrong. The look on Mr. Rowan's face that day has never left me. His eyes were wild, and his voice cracked when he shouted at me to stay away from the shed. For a man who usually barely waved when I saw him outside, the desperation in his voice shook me. Clara was standing just a few steps behind me, and I could see the way she narrowed her eyes at him. She wasn't scared. If anything, she looked more curious than ever, like she had just been handed a puzzle to solve. I put a hand to keep her from moving forward, but she brushed me off. "Dad," she whispered. "He's acting like a crazy person. It's just a shed." Her words stung because they reminded me I had dismissed the shed myself. For years, I had told him it was nothing, just an old wooden structure owned by a man who didn't take care of his property. But listening, breathing, I wasn't so sure. "Clara, stay behind me," I said firmly. Mr. Rowan staggered forward, his thin form shaking, as he reached for my arm. "Michael," he pleaded, "listen to me. Don't go near it. Don't let her near it. I'm begging you." His grip was surprisingly strong, and the fear in his voice was raw. Clara rolled her eyes, but I could see her nerves starting to creep in. Her voice softened when she spoke. "Dad, do you hear that?" At first, I thought she was just trying to scare me, but then I heard it too. A faint scratching noise, like nails dragging along wood, followed by a dull thud. It wasn't steady. It came in bursts, as if whatever was inside was trying and failing to move freely. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. My first thought was that an animal had gotten trapped inside, maybe a rat or a stray dog, but something about the rhythm of the sound didn't feel right. It was uneven, almost deliberate. Mr. Rowan tightened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he hissed. "Leave it alone. Go home and keep that girl away." His voice broke when he said the last part, and for the first time, I saw tears welling in his tired eyes. Clara took a cautious step forward, ignoring both of us. She bent slightly, peering at the shed with her head tilted like she was listening for more. "Dad," she said quietly, "that doesn't sound like an animal." My heart sank because she was right. It didn't. It sounded like something, or someone, was trying to get out. I caught her arm before she could get closer. "Clara, enough!" I snapped, my voice sharper than I wanted it to be. She jerked her arm back, glaring at me with the stubborn defiance only a teen. "Why are you both acting like this?" she demanded. "It's just a shed. If there's something in there, to check. What if it's hurt? What if it needs help?" Her words hit me harder than to admit, because beneath the fear and she had if there was an injured animal or worse, a person, walking away, but something about the was trembling that simple. I looked back at his face, his lips pressed together. He was holding back a secret that was eating him alive. For years, people in the neighborhood had whispered, calling him strange, even dangerous. I had always defended him, telling he was just a private old man, but now, standing only a few feet from his shed, I wasn't sure I believed that. "Michael," he said, his voice breaking. Please, if you value your family, don't open that door. Clara shook her, muttering under her breath. This is ridiculous. She pulled her phone from her pocket, switching on the flashlight, and started walking toward the shed despite my warning. I lunged forward, grabbing her shoulder. Clara, stop! My voice came out louder than I intended, the fear finally through. She froze, startled, but her eyes never left the shed. Another thud echoed from inside, harder this time, making the wooden frame shudder. Clara's breath hitched, and I could see the moment her curiosity turned into unease. She clutched my arm tightly now, no longer eager to prove me wrong. I stared at the weathered boards of the shed, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every instinct told me to listen to Rowan and take Clara inside, to lock the doors, and forget about the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind those walls wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. The shed was no longer just a mystery. It was a threat, and I knew I had to make a choice. I stood frozen in the yard, torn between two voices pulling at me. One was my neighbor, desperate and trembling, begging me to turn away. The other was my daughter, stubborn but afraid, clutching my arm as her eyes stayed locked on the shed. The scratching had stopped for a moment, but the silence felt even worse. It was the kind of silence that makes your chest tight, like the world is holding its breath. I swallowed hard and looked at Rowan. His lips trembled as though he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He just shook his head slowly, like he knew the choice I was about to make and hated me for it. Clara whispered, "Dad, what if someone's in there?" Her voice was softer now, stripped of its usual sarcasm. She wasn't challenging me anymore. She was scared, and so was I. I pulled her a step behind me, my protective instincts kicking in, but my mind was a storm. If I did nothing, I'd be haunted by the thought that maybe someone was trapped inside, suffering. If I acted, I risked proving Rowan right. The decision weighed heavier than anything I'd ever faced as a father. I took a slow breath and said, "Stay here." Clara's grip on my arm tightened. "Dad, no. I mean it, Clara. Stay here. If something happens, you run back to the house and lock the door. Don't argue with me on this." My voice came out low but firm. She searched my face, looking for a crack in my resolve, but finally she nodded, though her fingers didn't let go until I gently pried them away. Rowan let out a broken groan. "Michael, please, don't open it. You have no idea what you're doing." I looked him in the eye. "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me what's inside." But he dropped his gaze to the ground and shook his head again. That silence told me everything. He knew, but he wasn't going to say. That left me with no choice. I stepped forward. The grass crunched under my shoes as I crossed the short distance to the shed. Up close, the air around it felt heavier, carrying the stale, sour smell of wood, rotting in dampness. The boards were weathered, darkened with age, and the small window near the roof was covered with thick dust, letting no light out. The door was chained, but not locked. It looped through the handles and fastened with an old padlock that hung, loose and broken. Whoever had sealed this place hadn't done it to keep themselves out. They had done it to keep whatever was inside from getting free. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the gap. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound returned. A shuffle, a dragging scrape, followed by a weak but deliberate thud. It wasn't random. It wasn't wild like an animal. It was purposeful. My skin crawled. I could feel Clara's eyes on my back, and Rowan's ragged breaths behind me. I gripped the chain with both hands, pulled it down, and felt the metal give way with a sharp snap. The padlock clattered to the dirt. Rowan cried out. "No, don't do it!" Clara gasped. "Dad!" I shoved the door just enough to widen the gap. A thin stream of light spilled inside, cutting through the gloom. For a second, all I saw was dust and shadow. Then, something moved. A pale hand pressed against the inside of the door, trembling, fingers stretching toward the light. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. I stumbled back, my body instinctively recoiling, even as my mind screamed at me to help. Clara's sharp intake of breath told me she saw it too. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking. That's a girl. The hand slowly slid back into the darkness, leaving only silence behind again. I stood frozen, my pulse pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Rowan broke down then, his voice cracking into sobs. You don't understand. You think you're helping, but you'll destroy us all. Please, Michael, walk away. His knees buckled, and he crumpled onto the grass, covering his face with his hands. I stared at the door, my mind racing. Every rational part of me screamed to listen to him, to drag Clara back into the house, to pretend none of this was real. But I couldn't. I had seen the hand. I had seen the desperate reach for freedom. I turned back to Clara. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, but there was no hesitation in her voice when she whispered, "We can't leave her in there." The words cut through me. Because she was right. If I walked away now, I'd be condemning someone to whatever hell existed inside that shed. My hands shook as I gripped the door again. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a choice between fear and humanity, and I knew what I had to do. I pulled the door wide open. The door groaned as it swung open, the rusty hinges shrieking against the silence of the yard. For a moment, the sunlight cut across the darkness inside, slicing through the thick smell of mildew and something far more sour, like rot and sweat baked into the wood. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, one hand gripping the edge of the door, the other raised instinctively, as if it could shield me from whatever waited in there. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Shadows clung to every corner, the air heavy and damp. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw her. She was crouched in the far corner of the shed, a girl, no older than Clara, her skin pale as paper and streaked with grime. Her dark hair hung in tangled clumps around her face, and her wrists were bound by thick leather straps that chained her to a wooden post. Her knees trembled as she tried to stand, but she stumbled, collapsing against the restraints with a weak gasp. Clara let out a sharp cry behind me. "Dad, she's real." The girl lifted her head, her eyes wide, hollow, but shining with desperate hope. Her lips parted, and a voice rasped out, barely more than a whisper. "Help me." I froze. The sound of her voice pierced me, fragile yet urgent, like she had been holding onto it for years waiting for someone to hear. My instincts as a father slammed into me. Clara was the same age, and I couldn't stop imagining her in this girl's place. Rowan collapsed to his knees in the grass, his hands outstretched toward the open shed. His voice cracked into a wail. "No, Michael, no! You don't know what you've done!" I turned back to him, anger burning through my fear. "What is this, Rowan? Who is she?" His face twisted, streaked with tears. "She's my granddaughter," he choked out. "Her name is Ilara." The name hit me like a stone. It was real. She was real, and Rowan had kept her here, hidden away like some dark secret buried in his backyard. Clara's voice trembled as she stepped closer to me. "Dad, she's about my age." I could hear the disbelief in her words, the horror, and I felt it too. I took another step inside the shed, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Ilara flinched, retreating as far as her restraints allowed, as though she didn't know whether to trust me. My heart ached at the sight. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes locked onto mine, searching for something. Safety, truth, anything she could cling to. "Please," she breathed again, her voice raw. "Don't leave me here." Behind me, Rowan shouted, his words tangled in fear. "You don't understand. Her father, my son, he's dangerous. He wanted to take her, hurt her, destroy her life. I couldn't let that happen. I kept her here to protect her." "Protect her?" My voice thundered through the shed, the anger I'd been holding back breaking free. "You chained her in the dark like an animal." Rowan shook his head violently, rocking back and forth in the dirt. "It was the only way. You don't know him. You don't know what he would have done." Clara gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening with tears. "Dad, we can't leave her here. We have to help her." The words struck me harder than anything, because they came from my daughter, who had been hurting for so long, who had been carrying her own grief and loneliness. And now she was looking at this girl, this stranger, and seeing herself. I crouched down near Ilara, my voice softening. I'm going to get you out of here. Her eyes widened with fear and relief all at once. I pulled at the straps around her wrists. They were stiff and cracked, but the leather bit deep into her skin. It took everything I had to tear them free, and when I finally loosened the last one, Ilara's arms fell limp at her sides. She winced in pain, rubbing her wrists where the marks ran deep. Clara rushed forward, kneeling beside her, wrapping her arms gently around the trembling girl. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're safe." Rowan let out a guttural cry, his voice breaking like glass. "You don't understand. I was keeping her safe. You'll ruin everything." But I didn't care anymore. All I could see was the hollow look in Ilara's eyes, the years of stolen freedom carved into her face. I reached into my pocket, my hands shaking, and pulled out my phone. For a second, I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on me. Turning Rowan in meant shattering his life, ending any trust left between us. But letting this continue was unthinkable. I dialed 911. My voice was steady when I spoke. "There's a girl. She's been kept locked in a shed. We need help. Send someone now." Rowan screamed, lunging forward, but his frail body collapsed before he reached me. He lay in the grass, sobbing, whispering the same thing over and over again. "I was protecting her. I was protecting her." I looked down at him, my jaw tight. "No," I said quietly. "You were protecting yourself." When I turned back, Clara was holding Ilara close, their foreheads pressed together, and for the first time since her mother's death, I saw my daughter's tears fall not from grief, but from compassion. That was the moment everything changed. The sirens came faster than I expected. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted across the neighborhood, washing over the trees and houses like a storm of color. Neighbors began to peek from their windows, some stepping outside, whispering to one another as police cars pulled up in front of Rowan's house. I stood there in the yard, holding on to Clara's shoulder while she kept her arm wrapped protectively around Ilara. 2 officers rushed to the shed first, their faces hardening as soon as they saw the girl inside. They quickly moved her out, gently helping her to her feet. Ilara stumbled, her legs too weak to hold her, but Clara stayed by her side, whispering encouragement, refusing to let her fall. It was strange watching my daughter, who had been drowning in grief for so long, suddenly come alive with a purpose that was bigger than herself. When the paramedics arrived, they laid Ilara on a stretcher and began checking her vitals. I caught her eyes for a brief second. They were wide and afraid, but there was something else there too. Relief. A small flicker of light that told me she understood this nightmare was ending. Meanwhile, Rowan sat slumped on the ground, his hands cuffed behind his back. His head hung low, his body trembling with sobs that seemed to come from a place of bottomless guilt. For a moment, I almost felt pity. He had convinced himself that chaining his granddaughter in a shed was an act of protection, but in the end, it had been about fear. Fear of losing her, fear of his own son, fear that had consumed him until it twisted into cruelty. As they lifted him to his feet, he looked at me with tear-stained eyes. "You don't understand," he rasped. "I did it for her. I kept her safe." I stared at him, my chest heavy. "Keeping someone safe doesn't mean stealing their life," I said quietly. "You didn't protect her. You trapped her." He lowered his gaze and said nothing more as they led him away. The yard felt eerily quiet once the chaos began to clear. Clara stood beside me, her face pale but resolute. She watched the ambulance doors close around Ilara, her fingers gripping mine tightly. "Dad," she whispered, "she could have been me." Her words hit me harder than anything. She was right. Seeing Ilara chained and broken was like staring into a mirror of everything I had feared for Clara after her mother's death. That grief would trap her. That pain would steal her youth. But Clara had chosen compassion instead of cruelty. She had seen herself in that girl and reached out instead of turning away. That night, after the police left and the street returned to silence, Clara and I sat on the porch together. For the first time in months, she leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. The air was cool, the sound of crickets rising from the grass, but my mind replayed the moment over and over again. The pale hand pressing against the door, the desperate whisper for help, Rowan's trembling voice trying to convince himself he was right. Clara broke the silence. "Do you think she'll be okay?" I took a deep breath, staring at the empty shed in the distance. She's free now. That's the first step. She has a chance. And sometimes, a chance is all someone needs. We sat quietly for a long time. I thought about the years Elara had lost, about how she had been denied the simple joys of being young, school, friends, laughter, even just stepping outside and feeling the sun. But I also thought about her eyes. In that moment, she looked at Clara. There had been pain, yes, but also connection. And connection was the first sign of healing. Over the following weeks, the story spread across the neighborhood, then across town. People couldn't believe it. They called Rowan a monster. Some said they had always suspected something. But the truth is, most of us hadn't looked closely enough. We saw the overgrown yard, the quiet man who kept to himself, and we left it at that. None of us had dared to wonder what was hidden behind those weathered boards. For me, the lesson was clear. Fear and silence can build walls just as strong as chains. Rowan's silence had kept Elara trapped, and my choice to ignore the strange unease I felt about that shed for so many years, had allowed it to go on longer than it should have. I told myself it wasn't my business, but sometimes, turning away is the most dangerous thing you can do. Clara changed after that day. She still carried her grief, but she carried it differently. She understood now that pain doesn't excuse cruelty, and that compassion is the only way through it. She visited Elara in the hospital once she was stable, and when she came back, her eyes were brighter. She told me Elara had smiled at her, a small, tired smile, but a real one. That was enough. As for me, I think about Rowan often, about how a man who once had a family let fear twist him until he became the very thing he was afraid of. I'll never forget the way he looked at me, desperate for me to believe he had done the right thing. But there are no chains in this world strong enough to justify stealing someone's freedom. When I looked into Elara's eyes that day, I realized the real danger hadn't been the shed. It had been silence. Silence from Rowan. Silence from the neighbors. Silence from me. And I promised myself I would never stay silent again. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from.